In this lecture, we're going to see how you store your data in QML using the settings QML type. Here we are on the online documentation for the settings QML type, and they say that it provides persistent platform independent application settings. If you are on a Windows machine, it is stored in a given location. If you are on a Mac, it is stored in a given location, but this location is not for you to mess with. Okay, this is handled by the system. All you have to do is know how to use this, and your data is going to be saved. You're going to be able to save your data, and you're going to be able to load your data. First thing you should notice is that they have a note here. You should read this very carefully. This type is made available by importing the Qt Labs settings module. Types in Qt Labs modules are not guaranteed to remain compatible in future versions. If you are using this, you should be careful and come back in the future to see if there are any changes to this and change your application accordingly. There are two ways we are going to use this thing really. One is to let the settings completely handle the saving and loading of data for us. And this is what they do in this example here. Another way is to do part of the work of saving the data yourself and save the data when your component is dying. Okay, you do that like this. And we're going to do an example in a moment. Right now, we want to go to Qt Creator, start a project, and see how we can let the system handle everything for us. Here we are in Qt Creator. We're going to create a new project. It's a Qt Quick application as usual. We call it Settings Demo 1 because we are going to do another settings demo. We hit Next, choose our Qt version, and finish. We want to say Settings Demo 1. We want to do what we are supposed to do, import Qt Labs settings 1.0. Come back to our application and do that. In this application, we want to store the location and the size of the window. So we are going to store X, Y, width, and height. And we want to store the color of the rectangle that we are going to put inside here. We want to put in a rectangle component pretty quick. Rectangle ID, rect ID. It's going to fill the parent. And its color is going to be red by default. Inside, we want to put a mouse area. It's going to fill the rectangle. When it is clicked, we want to pop up a dialog that is going to allow the user to select a color. Because we want to use dialogues, we want to import the module like this. You probably remember this. We have seen this before. Inside our mouse area, we are going to define a color dialog component. Control A, Control I to align. And it is nothing fancy. We have an ID. It has a title that tells us to choose a color. And we want to know when the color is selected. We know that in the onAccepted method here, and the new color is going to be stored in the color property of the color dialog. When it is rejected, we say canceled. Notice that we are using a wrong ID here, so we should say rect ID and set the color of this rectangle here. So what we want to do when we click, we're going to say color dialog ID open. We're going to open the dialog. If we run the application, we see our window here. But we have the possibility to click inside the rectangle and choose a different color if we wish so. Okay, the color becomes blue. But if we close the application and open it again, you see that the color that we set is lost. And if we move it, for example, to the top here, change the color to black, hit OK, close, open again. You see that location data and color data is lost. We want to change that. We want to save all this information using settings. So we're going to go below the rectangle here and say settings. We want to set a category for this set of settings. Let's call this window because it is window related data. And the way you store data automatically, you define a set of property aliases that link to the data that you want to save. So for example, for the X location for this window, we're going to say property alias and say window. We need to give the window an ID. Let's say root ID. And we're going to say here root ID X. And we're going to do the same for Y, width, and height. So we can copy this and paste it a couple of times. This is going to be Y, width, and height. And you may not believe it, but just by doing this, you are instructing your system to keep track of these values for you. Okay, when the X property changes for this window, we're going to store that. And next time when we run the application, it is going to get the data from these settings here. Notice that the default value for these things is set here. So the X position is going to be the default one. The Y position is going to be the default one. Width and height are going to be these things here. Let's see what happens on the location data of our window if we run. Let's move it in the top left corner of our screen here and reduce the size of it, make it really small. Let's close the application, run it again, and you see that our settings are not saved. We expected the settings to be saved. What is wrong? Well, if we go back to the documentation, if you scroll down a little bit, you're going to see application identifiers here. So these are the settings that are specific to your application, and you have to pass in things like this. Okay, organizational name, organization domain, application name. If you don't pass in these settings, your settings are not going to be saved because obviously your application doesn't have an identity, and if the system saves your data, it's not going to know who the data belongs to. So short story is you have to set this. And if you notice that we set this in the main CPP file, the C++ file of your QML project. So we can go back to our project here, go in sources, open main.cpp, go below where we define app here, go below it and put in things like this, Control A, Control I to align. Okay, we are setting the organization name, we are setting the domain, and we are setting the application name. Okay, do this in this file. You can pass in whatever data you want. You can pass in whatever organization name, pass in a domain. You can even pass this if you want. I don't mind. And you can pass in settings demo. Now, if we run the application, you see that location data is saved. I can change this. I can make this really, really big and move it to the right, for example. Close the application, open it again, and you see that location and size information is stored for us. This is how you store data automatically. You put whatever data that you want to save in the settings like this, and the data is going to be saved. Another thing worth seeing is that you can break your settings into categories, and we are going to do that. We're going to create another settings component. Category is going to be color. You can do whatever you want in here, and we are going to say property alias rect color. It's going to be rect ID color. And just like this, it is going to keep track of the color that we have in the rectangle here. In other words, if we change it like we do here, the new change is going to be saved. Let's run. Choose the color. Let's make it green like this. Hit OK. Make this thing really small like this. Put it in the bottom left corner of the window, close the application, open it again. You see that even the color is saved. Let's make it yellow. Hit OK, put it in the top like this, close the application, open it again. You see that everything is saved. This is really convenient, and it works really well if you want to save data. You don't have to do a lot of things, and it is very clean. Looking at this, you don't have a lot of garbage that saves and loads your data. But the cost is that every time a property changes, you are going to save it in your application. And this can be a huge drain on your performance. So you want to be careful when you use this. And a better way, if you don't want to pay this performance cost, is to save the data yourself and choose when you save the data. And in the next lecture, we're going to show you how you can exactly do that. I'll see you there.